Epic fantasy meets power fantasy, a DM's exercise in ambition, coming right up on FlavorText. Hi, Ilona here, she, her, to tell the story of my first ever DM experience. I grew up on books, fantasy primarily. I became obsessed with Tolkien in middle school, to the extent that I was teaching myself Quenya, High Elvish, in my spare time, and writing a Tengwar translation of my script during play rehearsals. So, when I decided I wanted to DM something, I figured I'd go to my roots. But everyone knows the classic story of Frodo and the One Ring, the Fellowship, all that jazz. I figured I'd go to the prequel. The Silmarillion. History book made fantasy. A heck of a read, but also a load of material to draw from. I wanted epic fantasy. I set the level at 14 for this two-shot, which, in Pathfinder 1st Edition, means a lot of bells and whistles. And I decided on the big bad himself, Melkor, aka Morgoth, aka the devil in this world. He had the Silmarils, these jewels stolen from the elves, which held the last of the true light of the two trees. For the record, the dying light from those two trees became the sun and the moon, so... pretty powerful stuff. Our gang of intrepid heroes would be tasked with retrieving the Silmarils from inside his dungeon from his own iron crown. Our cast included Miro Padfoot, a hobbit oracle/paladin to Yavanna, giver of fruits, possibly a patron of min-maxed healers. Naugrim, a beardless and bald dwarf cleric, given unholy powers by Morgoth himself, and dedicated to destroying him. Iolo, a hobbit barbarian with a lucerne hammer, mantle of immortality, and a ring of invisibility. Ooh, sorry. Something in my throat. Sean Fei Hung, a dwarf brawler using martial flexibility to shift into 8 different styles, representing the 8 gods of the Drunken Fist. It was a two-shot, I wasn't going to be a stickler about canon. And Sirkave Turienel, an elf paladin seeking to redeem herself for her part in the kinslaying. One thing I asked the players to do was write rumors about their characters for the others to know. You don't get to level 14 without a reputation. Sirkave was a guardian of travelers and a deserter. Miro was rumored to be the lover as well as traveling companion of Naugrim. Iolo might have done a massacre. Naugrim single-handedly destroyed a demonic cult. And Sean bought people drinks to get into bar fights with them. They assembled, brought personal letters on the back of the giant wolf Huan. I wrote and made individual scrolls to hand to the players as they met, one by one. They were brought to the Grove of Luthien, who basically gave them their instructions. Go to the fortress of Angband. Retrieve the last hope of our people. See, Luthien was a half-elf, half-demigod who fell in love with a human baron and is where the whole Arwen-Aragorn parallel comes from, which, for the record, that relationship was only in the appendix of the books, and they did Glorfindel dirty in the movie. Anyways, off they went. They approached the gates of Angband, the ash from the nearby volcanoes coating their lungs. Warg riders patrolled, and archers were posted as lookouts. Naugrim, Sirkave, and Iolo took the front, while Sean and Miro held back. When stealth failed, Naugrim took one look at a cluster of archers and straight up nuked them. As wargs and their riders rushed back, Iolo cleaved and Sirkave reaped the bodies. Nobody doubted that Iolo could have been capable of that massacre now. I don't think Miro blew a single channel that fight. Sean was last in initiative and ran into nothing but dead bodies. Once inside, they turned right, away from a coliseum and into the barracks. They encountered Tevildo, the Prince of Cats, who immediately dropped an anti-magic field to get rid of all the buffing Sirkave had done. Tevildo was designed to be a hyper-mobile pain in the butt, while the nearby orc shaman tried to turn the party against each other with dominate person and hunger for flesh. That, didn't happen. The cat kinda ended up flanked by our heavy hitters of Sirkave and Iolo. They easily took care of any infantry that dared make their way to the party's vicinity. A couple straight up failed their morale checks and ran off to raise the alarm. The shaman didn't do a lot of, well, anything, as Naugrim focused their fire on him. He did turn into a vor, which is basically a boar with spikes on his back, and an aura of fear that everyone easily passed. And poor Sean rolled last in initiative again, and mostly cleared up some mooks. Epic fantasy! Woo! Downwards they went, seeking their destiny, into the lair of Glaurung, the Lord of Dragons. Now, fun fact, he didn't have wings. Later dragons got wings, but not this one. His hoard was one of bones, with great piles of femurs, skulls, and ribs forming mountains within his cavern. What he did have, in my version anyway, was the ability to shadow step, snatch players within his jaws, and breathe negative energy. The party was finally going to need healing. Lots of healing. Miro's primary way of keeping everyone healthy was to use a Shield Others spell and Lifelink special ability, which meant he took half the damage meant for another player, and then could just heal himself with a Lay on Hands as a swift action. Glaurung, upon allowing the players to enter his lair, immediately teleported to the shadow behind them and got a full breath attack at everyone. However, Naugrim had negative energy affinity and thus healed by negative energy. So not only did the Teddlers mean hardly anybody took damage, but I ruled that Miro got half of Naugrim's healing too. Some things are just too awesome not to rule cool. Iolo slipped on his ring and got around the beast to flank and got a good swing in. Glaurung had multiple health pools, and each time one was taken out, he got another turn in the initiative. He kept moving around the map, leaving cones of shadow wherever he used his breath attack, and snatching players in his claws and jaws. Naugrim came in with his freedom of movement domain spell, and kept Sean and himself from being caught for too long. In a creative twist, they used the spell Bone Shatter to bring down a mountain of skulls on Glaurung, removing a movement option and dealing some damage. Miro realized the beast would be harmed by positive energy, and went full Neji mode with healing Hands of Pain on this thing. And Sean, who lost so many turns to bad rolls and grapples, switched to full DPS mode and unloaded 21d6 plus 18d8 plus 151 in a full attack. Took him a while to get there, but dang did he do work when he was set up. It was clear that if he wanted to win some bar fights, he would definitely have to give his opponents some liquid courage. One thing remained. Morgoth, the Corruptor, or as he titled himself, Master of the Fates of Arda. Our hero slammed open the doors to his throne room. It was bright as day, with the shining Silmarils in his crown. He turned his malice on the party, and made them see their compatriots as the worst versions of themselves. Sirkave, the deserter, dripped with the blood of her people. He called them by their sins. Harmonious chimes above them turned to discord, transforming into hanging torture devices still crusted with blood. His army funneled in behind them, a literally endless stream, as the party hadn't made a point to keep alarms from being raised. This would be a constant push that cut off their retreat and forced them ever closer to danger. At least, I thought it would. Sean Fei Hung drank another devotion to his drunken gods, and Marshall flexed into a build of combat reflexes and stand still that allowed him to use his now 6 attacks of opportunity to stop the enemy movement in its tracks, halting the army's advance and essentially holding the door in perpetuity. Attention turned to Gothmog, the Balrog general who was at his master's side, flashing out with his whip of shadow and flame. Torture devices fell from the ceiling, cracking pieces of the floor into the lava beneath them. Round after round, the army was kept at bay. But here's where things went differently than I had originally planned. See, I had this new map I found. I'd drawn my own and looked at aura lengths and had some pillars and all that. But I found a much larger one with 2 bridges and a throne and thought, this'll be perfect. It's huge, it's epic, it's got all these cool textures, it'll be great. But instead of the all-out slugfest I had in mind, Morgoth, Master of Fire and Ice, had our melee combatants dodging fireballs and ice rays in the turns they had to spend to get to him. Sirkave and Miro used the spell slots in his Rod of Absorption to sprout wings and fly closer, bypassing the lava. Iolo got stunned by Morgoth's mace, and Miro had to focus on his 14 different ways of healing, all while Naugrim dropped nuke after nuke. Sirkave laid down a glorious smite. The Balrog fell, and by Iolo's hand, Morgoth was incapacitated. the whole party waited while Naugrim exacted his final revenge by rolling some thundering fistfuls of dice. Sirkave, probably the main person aware of the lore behind the Silmarils, wrapped the crown in cloth and refused to touch it. The jewels were known to burn the hands of anyone they deemed unworthy. Part of why Morgoth had them in a crown was because he couldn't physically touch them, and they were eventually lost because Maedhros and Malgor were in such agony that one got thrown into the sea and another threw himself into a fiery pit. The third one was taken by Aeronel to Valinor, basically heaven, and his light was put into a star! Remember the light of the star that Frodo got from Galadriel? That was the light from the star that was made out of the Silmaril! It's all connected! Anyways, back in our timeline, they returned victorious with all 3 gems intact, and as a reward, were each granted a single wish. Because what one shot doesn't end in a wish? Sean declined, saying that he had all he could ever wish for. Iolo, poor tragic thing, asked for the loss of everyone he had ever known, simply not to hurt any longer. Sirkave asked for her people to have survived the kinslaying. And Naugrim asked for a ring, covered in vines and symbols of harvest in the exact right size for Miro's finger. See, my players hadn't told me this, but they decided that the rumor about their relationship was true. And so Naugrim, with his new ring, got down on both knees and proposed. Of course, Miro said yes, and in turn, Miro wished for the perfect wedding. It was beautiful. More than I ever could have hoped for. Sometimes being powerful means thundering fistfuls of dice, cleaving through enemies, or holding strong against a massive army. And sometimes it means bringing love back into the world.
Up next, bear traps, brains, and brawn collide in the terrible tale of a seemingly insurmountable foe. A reminder that a story doesn't have to be epic to be great. Coming right up on FlavorText.